What if the man cleaning your school hallway turned out to be the reason your father came home from war? At Jefferson High in Missouri, a forgotten janitor was laughed at for the strange tattoo on his hand. Until one Sunday morning, during a school ceremony, a Navy SEAL in full uniform walked in, spotted that tattoo, and dropped to attention. What followed left the room silent, the internet shaken, and a nation remembering a hero it had almost buried in dust. You're watching endless stories, where we honor the quiet ones, and the mission never ends. You wouldn't have noticed him, not unless you were the kind of person who pays attention to the silence between bells, the sound of a mop bucket while dragging slightly to the left, or the soft, worn thump of a man who walks with a limp he never complains about. At Jefferson High, Elijah Boone had been pushing that mop for 17 years. He arrived before the sun, long before the students with their tangled earbuds and too loud laughter, and he left long after the last classroom light was turned off. His face was lined but unreadable, his gloves always tight, his shirt always buttoned to the top, and on the rare days when he rolled up his sleeves, usually in August when the air conditioning broke again, you might catch a glimpse of something inked into the skin just above his left wrist. A trident spearing through a lightning bolt, with 3 faded letters beneath it, RSV. No one asked him about it. Not the teachers. Not the kids. They had stories, of course, half jokes, half dares. Some said he'd been in prison. Others thought he was just some old burnout who'd never left town. The most popular rumor was that he used to be in a biker gang, and that the tattoo was some kind of death mark. The janitor with the limp and the prison ink. That's how they saw him. Not once did anyone ask what those letters really meant. Not once did they speak his name with anything but impatience. Until the day the SEAL showed up. It was Veterans Day. The school had its usual assembly planned. Nothing fancy. Some flags, a few chairs in the gym, the local news invited for a 15-second soundbite, and a guest speaker who, this year, was someone the principal couldn't stop talking about. Command Master Chief Jack Thorne, a Navy SEAL with more medals than a Boy Scout jamboree. The kids didn't care. They were mostly just happy about the shortened schedule. Phones buzzed. Snapchats fired. Nobody really noticed that the janitor was there, standing off to the side near the fire extinguisher he'd just inspected. He wasn't in a seat. He never took one. He leaned on the mop like it was just another day, until Thorne walked in. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from a microphone cutting out. Comes from something older, something heavier. Thorne stood on that stage for less than 10 seconds before he saw Boone. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just stared. And then, in full dress uniform, he stepped off the stage and began walking. Past the band, past the rows of whispering students, past the stunned teachers, and stopped 3 feet in front of the man everyone ignored. Then he saluted. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't for show. It was the kind of salute you give to someone who once stood between life and death and chose to carry the weight anyway. Boone didn't blink. He didn't return the salute. He just looked at Thorne the way an old tree looks at a storm. Unmoved, rooted in something deeper than most people can comprehend. And then Thorne said, quietly, but clearly enough for every single person in the gym to hear, "Sir, is that RSV Unit 9? There was a pause. Boone's lips parted. Just slightly, and then he nodded. One short, slow nod that cracked the world open. Thorne's breath caught. His jaw clenched. "I was trained on stories about you," he said. "We thought you were a myth." Phones came out. Cameras clicked. But for once, no one dared speak. The gym held its breath, and in that moment, every student, every teacher, every person who had ever looked through Elijah Boone realized they'd never really seen him at all. Because the man pushing the mop wasn't just a janitor. He was a ghost from a mission no one ever talked about. A legend buried beneath years of bleach and broken lockers. And today he had been recognized. Not with a microphone, not with a plaque, but with a salute from a man who knew exactly what that tattoo meant. After the salute, the world moved differently. For the first few seconds, no one even knew how to breathe. Jack Thorne lowered his arm slowly, respectfully, and said nothing more. He didn't need to. The entire gym, packed wall to wall with fidgeting teenagers, veteran parents, tired teachers, and too many half-hearted flags, had just been forced into stillness. Not by fireworks or speeches or some choreographed tribute, but by a quiet man in gloves and coveralls, and a tattoo no one had ever cared to ask about. And after that moment passed, it didn't pass gently. It echoed. By third period, the video was on Instagram. By fifth, it hit Reddit. And by the time the sun slipped behind the rust-colored bricks of the school, someone had posted it on TikTok with the caption, "When a Navy SEAL salutes your janitor and the whole room stops breathing." 1 hour later, it had over 300,000 views. But Boone didn't change. The next morning, he was mopping the cafeteria before sunrise. Same gloves, same limp, same slow, steady nod when the principal passed him in the hallway with eyes wide and lips twitching like he was deciding whether to say something or just keep moving. Students stared now. Not cruelly, not mockingly, just longer. They whispered. They asked, "What does RSV even stand for? Was he really in combat? Why didn't anyone tell us?" But no one asked him directly, because suddenly, Boone wasn't just the guy with the mop, he was something else. Something none of us had words for. And maybe we were afraid of what he might say if we gave him the chance. I remember passing him in the library corridor that afternoon. He was fixing a broken heater vent. I stopped. I looked. I opened my mouth. I almost asked. But he didn't look at me. Not with judgment or distance. Just calm. Like he'd seen too many people open their mouths with no real intention of listening. So I said nothing, and walked on. But the question stayed with me, and I wasn't the only one. At lunch, I overheard Coach Larson muttering to the chemistry teacher, "I served 4 years in Kuwait, and no one's ever saluted me." He meant it as a joke, but it didn't sound like one. Mississippi Park whispered back, "You didn't carry 4 wounded men across a valley under enemy fire with a fractured leg." It was the first time I'd heard someone defend Boone out loud. And it wouldn't be the last. By the end of the week, his supply closet door had a post-it note stuck to it. Then another, and another. Tiny squares of apology, admiration, questions scrawled in high school handwriting. "Sorry I laughed." "Thank you." "Did it hurt?" "Were you scared?" "Did they all make it out?" Boone didn't reply. He didn't remove them either. He just let them stay. The shift wasn't dramatic. There was no parade. No sudden, teary assembly. Just hallway space being given. Trash being picked up before he got there. Students lowering their voices when he passed. And every time someone said, "Thank you," it sounded like the words were being said for the first time in their lives, and meant. But there was one student who didn't write a note. Devin Kessler, linebacker, class clown, viral TikTok instigator. The same kid who'd filmed Boone limping across the gym and captioned it, "Bro thinks he's on a secret mission." That video had quietly disappeared after the salute. Taken down. Deleted. No apology followed. Just silence. Until Friday. Boone was cleaning the front steps that morning, sweeping cigarette butts into a cracked dustpan, when Devin walked out of the main office.
No cameras.
No audience. He stood there for a long time, then finally said, "Hey, Mr. Boone." The janitor looked up, expression unreadable. Devin shifted, glanced at the ground. "My uncle was in Fallujah. He never talks about it. But he told me once there was this guy, some support tech, didn't even carry a weapon. But when things went south, he picked up 3 people and walked through hell." His voice cracked. He said the guy never showed up on any report, just disappeared. He said some heroes vanish because they're tired of being found. Boone said nothing, just stood there, broom in one hand, the wind picking at the sleeves of his coat. Devin nodded once, then left. That was when it changed, fully and finally, not just the way we saw him, but the way we saw ourselves. Because once you recognize that the quiet man pushing a broom has carried the weight of others through fire and dust and silence, you start to wonder how many other people you've never truly seen. It was early on a Wednesday morning when the man in the gray suit arrived. He wore a badge clipped to his breast pocket that wasn't shown to anyone, and shoes that didn't squeak against the tile like ours did. He didn't sign in at the front office. He didn't ask for a visitor's badge. He just walked in like he owned the floor beneath his feet. No one noticed him at first except for Boone, and Boone didn't flinch. He just leaned his mop against the wall, folded his gloves slowly, and nodded toward the back hallway without a word. They walked in silence, disappearing around the corner like ghosts slipping through a doorway no one else could see. I followed, not because I meant to, but because something about the man's presence didn't feel administrative. It felt military, precise, and heavy, like orders carried in a briefcase instead of a voice. I didn't get too close. I stood near the lockers just around the bend and listened. "You've made quite a wave," the man said. His voice was calm but clipped, like someone used to being obeyed without question. "The video's in the hands of Naval PR now. They're processing it." Boone didn't respond. "We had a deal," the man continued. "You disappear. You don't talk. The file stays closed. No medals, no cameras, no inconvenient questions." Still no answer. "I'm not here to threaten you, Elijah," the man said, softer now. "I'm here because commands changed. A few of the higher-ups. They think you deserve to be known. The rest, well, they'd rather keep RSV-9 where it's always been, under lock and code. But when a SEAL salutes a janitor in front of 600 kids and half the country watches it online, people start asking questions." That was the first time Boone spoke. His voice was quiet and sanded down, the way wind polishes stone over decades. "They don't want the answers." "They might," the man replied. "For once, there's talk of lifting the blackout, declassifying the extraction, maybe even a citation, posthumous, if that's what it takes." Boone gave a small, tired sound, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Posthumous, of course." The man stepped closer. "You saved 4 men in the Red Sea Valley.
No coms. No evac.
Shattered femur. You dragged them 2 miles under fire, carrying the 5th until he died on your back. That kind of story doesn't stay buried forever." Boone's voice dropped to almost nothing. "I didn't carry it for glory. I carried it so they'd see their kids again. And that's why it matters." The hallway felt colder somehow. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there, hidden behind a half-closed locker door, hearing the truth unfold in pieces sharp enough to cut. "I'm not a hero," Boone said at last. "I'm a name they erased." "They didn't erase it," the man said. "They filed it where no one would ever look." There was silence after that, long and heavy. Then the man handed Boone a small black envelope. "This is your call. You want your name back? Open it. You don't? Burn it." Boone didn't reach for it. The man placed it on the utility shelf near the old paint cans, tapped the edge once, and walked away without another word. I didn't move until the echo of his footsteps disappeared completely. Then I leaned around the corner and saw Boone standing there, staring at the envelope like it might explode if touched. He didn't open it. He didn't even pick it up. He just stood still for a long, long time. Then he turned off the hallway light and walked away, leaving the envelope behind. The school day went on as if nothing had happened. Kids took quizzes, the lunchroom served meatloaf, and someone clogged the second-floor boys' restroom again. But something had shifted, and not just for me. That afternoon, as Boone pushed his cart past the front office, Devin stepped out and fell into step beside him. "You ever open that letter?" Devin asked. Boone didn't look at him. Didn't need to. "Why not?" "Because I already know what's in it. Names I haven't said in 30 years. Stories I buried with the last of my good sleep." Devin didn't speak for a while. Then he said quietly, "My uncle never opened his either." That made Boone pause. He turned just slightly, just enough to see Devin's face. Then maybe he understood. Devin nodded. He understood too well. That night, I walked the hallways long after the students were gone, after the office locked up, after the last teacher's car pulled away. I checked the utility shelf. The envelope was gone, but I knew Boone hadn't taken it to keep it. I found the remnants in the incinerator bin behind the maintenance shed. Blackened edges, barely legible, but still faintly stamped with the crest of the Department of the Navy. He didn't want the metal. He didn't need the files unsealed. Because some men don't carry missions to be remembered. They carry them so others live long enough to forget. The invitation didn't come in an envelope. It came by word of mouth, passed in hushed tones from soldier to soldier, whispered at American Legion halls, quietly texted between brothers who had bled together and knew better than to write anything down. By the time it reached Boone, it was just 6 words spoken without ceremony in the corner of the gym after a late-night basketball game. They're meeting Saturday, midnight.
No uniforms.
Boone didn't nod, didn't ask where. He just paused, like he was measuring the weight of memory against the piece of being forgotten, then went back to sweeping the bleachers with the same rhythm he'd carried for years. I don't know how I ended up there that night. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe the sound of my father's voice in my memory, saying that the best stories are the ones told with no audience at all. Whatever the reason, I found myself parked behind a line of trucks and dusty SUVs on a dirt road west of town, somewhere between the abandoned training depot and a cluster of pines that hadn't felt footsteps in decades. The fire was already lit. The smoke rose clean and quiet into the starless sky, and the men surrounding it didn't speak at first. They weren't young. None of them were. Faces lined, shoulders slightly hunched, movements deliberate. Some wore jackets with no patches. Others had nothing but flannel and tired boots. But you could tell, by the way they stood, the way they kept their backs to the wind, the way their eyes scanned the tree line without realizing it. You could tell. Boone arrived last.
No headlights.
No sound but the crunch of gravel beneath tires. He stepped out of an old pickup so weathered it looked like it had been built for desert crossings, not high school parking lots. He didn't carry anything. No speech. No box of photos. Just himself. And when he stepped into the circle, they didn't cheer. They didn't clap. One man, broad-shouldered, silver beard, stepped forward and wrapped him in a hug so hard it looked like something might break. Boone returned it slowly, like his bones remembered before his heart did. Then they sat. No one took the center. No one led. It wasn't that kind of gathering. One by one, they began to speak, not of missions or medals, but of moments. Laughter over instant coffee on a rooftop in Syria. A sandstorm that buried gear for days in Kuwait. A fire team that sang out of tune to stay awake on a night op in Kandahar. And then it quieted again. That's when Jack Thorne finally looked across the flames and said, "Elijah, will you tell us?" Boone didn't answer right away. He looked into the fire, into the orange crackle that lit up the hollow lines of his face. Then he spoke. Not loudly, not like a man trying to be heard, but like someone remembering out loud for the first time in a long, long while. "It was never supposed to be combat," he said. "Support role. Tech escort. I was meant to guide a small team through Red Sea Valley. Retrieve. Evacuate."
No engagement.
He paused. But the valley was a lie. He told them about the call going dark 10 minutes in. About the shifting winds that killed the drone feed. About the child with the grenade belt. About how he knew the mission was burned before the second shot had even echoed. "I was the only one not hit," he said. "Only because I tripped in the sand when the first round came in. Lucky break, they call it. But that's not what it felt like." He told them about crawling. About dragging one man by his vest while carrying another across his shoulders. About the third who begged him to save the others and pressed his dog tags into Boone's palm before going still. About the fourth, the youngest, who kept whispering a name, his mother's, maybe, or someone he never got to say goodbye to. "They didn't scream," Boone said, voice raw. "They didn't panic. They just looked at me like they were waiting to be told it was going to be okay. And I lied. I told them we'd all go home. And then the fire popped. Loud, sharp, like a gunshot that made every man there twitch. Boone didn't flinch. I made it out 3 hours later," he continued. 2 on foot. 1 I carried in my arms. The last one. He was already gone, but I couldn't leave him. Not in that sand. Not for the dogs or the sun." He looked up then, and no one looked away. "I never gave those names. Never wrote a report. They classified the mission as operational blackout. Gave the families folded flags and polite explanations. And I went back to a desk job for 2 months before I left.
No ceremony.
No thank you. Just out." Someone passed him a flask. He didn't drink. Just held it. like it was weight he recognized. Jack spoke softly. "Why'd you come back here? Why Jefferson High?" Boone shrugged. It was quiet. No one asked questions. And the kids? They reminded me what peace looked like. No one spoke after that. The fire cracked. A few men stared into the distance. One wiped his face with his sleeve. Before dawn, Boone stood. He looked at each man, one by one, and said nothing. He didn't need to. They all understood. Then he nodded once and walked away, the gravel under his boots the only sound in the world. I stayed behind until the fire died. I never told Boone I was there. I don't think I ever will. Some stories aren't told for applause. They're told because sometimes, just sometimes, the weight is lighter when you let someone else help carry it. It started with a motion at the school board meeting, routine, almost forgettable. The principal had drafted it on the back of a lesson plan while waiting in line for coffee. A symbolic recognition, he called it. Nothing flashy, just something permanent. There wouldn't be a statue. Boone would have hated that. No naming of a building either. He would have stopped coming in. What they decided, in the end, was a chair. One single auditorium seat. Front row, stage right. Reserved. Always empty. A small brass plaque fixed to its backrest, engraved with quiet precision. In honor of Elijah Boone, he carried us all. They planned a ceremony for Friday morning. Veterans from town were invited. The mayor confirmed. The local paper sent a photographer. Students were given small American flags and told to behave. There would be a song from the choir, a few words from the faculty, and a slideshow playing soft music over still images. A hallway being swept, a pair of gloves folded on a cart, a blurry silhouette in a maintenance jumpsuit framed against a locker door. The final image, they said, would be the moment Jack Thorne saluted him. Everyone assumed he'd show up. He didn't. That morning, the gym filled the same way it always did. Slow, noisy, distracted. But the moment the lights dimmed, a strange hush crept in. The principal's voice shook more than usual. Mississippi Park tried not to cry before her speech was done. The mayor said something about duty beyond recognition, but stumbled halfway through and just placed her hand on the plaque instead. Devin stood at the microphone longer than he needed to, gripping a piece of notebook paper that trembled in his hands. "I didn't know who he was," he said, "but now I do, and I'll never unknow it." When it was over, people waited. A few seconds too long. Like they believed, maybe, just maybe, he'd walk in late through the side door, take his place quietly, and nod like none of it mattered. But the door stayed closed. The seat remained empty. That afternoon, Boone didn't mop the cafeteria. He didn't restock the paper towels in the science wing. His cart stayed tucked in the corner of the supply closet, gloves folded neatly on top, as if they were waiting for the next pair of hands strong enough to wear them. I found him after school, sitting outside the auto shop across town, the same one where he brought his truck for oil changes. He was drinking from a paper cup, black coffee, no lid. Wind tugged at the corners of his collar. He didn't look surprised to see me, just nodded once, like he'd been expecting someone but didn't care who. "They did it today," I said. "I heard. You didn't want to come?" He took a slow sip, stared at the sidewalk. "They already honored me once. That was enough." "When?" He glanced up, not at me, past me, like he was seeing something I couldn't. "When they stood." I didn't understand at first. "At the assembly," he said. "After the salute. That moment when the whole room stood still. That wasn't for the military. That wasn't for Jack. That was for someone they realized they never saw." He finished the coffee and set the cup beside him, careful not to spill. Sometimes the quiet moments say more than the speeches. We sat there for a long time. No more questions. No more ceremony. Just two people sharing silence. And in that silence, I realized the seat wasn't empty because he rejected it. It was empty because it had always been his. He just never needed to sit down to earn it. 3 years passed. Nothing dramatic happened in that time. The world spun.
Senior graduated.
The lockers got repainted. The cafeteria finally switched from trays to biodegradable cartons. Life moved the way it always does when no one is looking. But Boone was still there. Quiet, steady, unchanged. He still came in before dawn. Still polished the floors with the same worn machine that sputtered every third step. Still kept the gloves folded neatly on the cart like someone else might need them. He never brought up the ceremony. Never mentioned the plaque. When people thanked him, he nodded. When they asked about his tattoo, he said it was from another life. And when Jack Thorne returned once a year, always unannounced, Boone always met him after hours in the back of the gym where the lights were dim and no one could eavesdrop. They sat in folding chairs. No words anyone ever heard. Just two men who didn't need to speak to understand. Then came September. It was a Tuesday. Crisp, clear. The kind of morning that makes you want to stand still and let the air remind you how quiet the world can be. I came in early that day, walking the same path I always did, expecting to see the mop bucket in the usual corner, the faint hum of the buffer machine already echoing off tile. But the hallway was still. Too still. No smell of cleaner. No creak of wheels. Just silence, heavy and unmoving. Boone didn't show up that day, or the next, or the one after. The principal called his home number. No answer. Someone knocked at his trailer out near the edge of town. The door was unlocked. The lights were off. His keys were still on the hook. And on the kitchen table, beside a single photo of 6 men crouched in sand with rifles slung over their backs, was a folded piece of paper. It read, "The job is finished. Thank you for letting me keep carrying." The coroner said it was peaceful. In his sleep, no pain, just gone, like a whisper that had finally rested. When the news reached the school, no announcement was made over the loudspeakers. There was no need. The air told everyone. The hallways felt colder. The floors looked duller. Even the bells rang softer. The auditorium seats stayed empty. But now students paused as they passed, some touching the plaque, some leaving folded notes beneath it like prayers. One kid, freshman, glasses, quiet, left his baseball glove. "Because he always waved at me when I practiced late," he said. The funeral wasn't large. But it didn't have to be. A few teachers, a few janitors from other schools who had heard. The principal, Mississippi Park. Devin, now in college, drove 4 hours to be there. And Jack, of course Jack. He flew in straight from deployment, dress uniform sharp, challenge coin clenched tight in his fist. When they lowered the casket, simple, wooden, no flag, just as Boone would have wanted, Jack stepped forward and placed the coin on top. Then he saluted, just once. No words. They buried him near the edge of town, under a maple tree that had lost half its leaves. There was no headstone, just a marker, small, steel, plain, engraved with 3 lines. Elijah Boone, he carried us all. RSV Unit 9. Afterward, the school made no big show. But on the first day of every month, someone, not always the same person, left a cup of black coffee on the steps before sunrise. The janitor's cart remained, but no one used it. The tools stayed exactly where he left them. And the empty chair? It was never filled again. Because some seats belong to those who didn't need recognition to become legends. And some legacies don't echo because they were loud. They echo because they were still. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you even just a little, consider this. There may be a Boone somewhere in your own life. Quiet, unnoticed, carrying more than they ever say. Share this video with someone who needs reminding that some heroes don't wear medals. They just keep showing up. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, human, subscribe to Endless Stories. Here we honor the quiet ones. The ones who carried the weight when no one asked them to. Because when we remember them, we carry them too.